The church doors exploded inward. Dust swirled in the September light, dancing in the beam that cut through the darkness of the sanctuary. And in that doorway, silhouetted against the Missouri sun, stood the most feared man in 4 states, William Anderson, Bloody Bill. The priest froze mid-prayer. His rosary beads slipped through trembling fingers and clattered against the wooden pew. Somewhere in this house of God, a sheriff was hiding. Bill Anderson could smell the fear. It had a particular scent, like copper and sweat and something else, something that reminded him of a building in Kansas City, of a 14-year-old girl named Josephine. But that comes later. First, you need to understand what brought Bill Anderson to this church, what crime the sheriff had committed, and why the priest who would witness everything that happened in the next 11 minutes, never spoke of it publicly until he was on his own deathbed, 43 years later. What he said then would change how historians understood the most brutal guerrilla of the American Civil War. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us go back to the summer of 1864, back to a Missouri that had become hell on earth, back to a war where there were no rules, no mercy, and no sanctuary, not even in the house of God. The American Civil War by 1864 had been raging for 3 years. In the East, great armies clashed in famous battles that would fill history books for generations: Gettysburg, Antietam, the Wilderness, Bull Run, Chancellorsville, names that school children would memorize for centuries to come. Names attached to generals who would become legends: Grant, Lee, Sherman, Jackson. But in Missouri, something different was happening, something darker, something that the history books would try very hard to forget, something that did not fit the noble narrative of brothers fighting brothers over high ideals and constitutional principles. Missouri was a border state. It had not seceded from the Union, but half its population sympathized with the Confederacy. Families were divided. Neighbors became enemies, and the violence that erupted was not the organized warfare of uniformed armies marching in formation. It was something far more personal, far more savage, far more intimate. They called it bushwhacking. The word itself tells you something. It was not war, it was hunting. Men hunting other men through the thick Missouri brush, ambushes in the night, raids at dawn, bodies left hanging from trees as warnings, no prisoners taken, no quarter given. On one side were the Jayhawkers and Redlegs, Union guerrillas from Kansas who crossed the border to burn, loot, and kill Confederate sympathizers. They came at night, their horses' hooves wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. They took what they wanted. They burned what they could not take. They left widows and orphans in their wake, and they called it patriotism. They called it preserving the Union. They called it justice. On the other side were the bushwhackers, Confederate guerrillas who answered violence with violence, atrocity with atrocity. They wore no uniforms. They carried multiple revolvers, 6, 8, sometimes 12 loaded pistols per man. They could reload on horseback at full gallop. They struck Union patrols without warning. They derailed trains. They executed prisoners. They scalped the dead and braided the hair into their horses' reins. And the most feared of them all, the one whose very name made Union soldiers check their weapons and say their prayers and write final letters to their families, was a 24-year-old farmer's son named William Anderson. They called him Bloody Bill, not because he was born violent, not because he emerged from the womb with murder in his heart, but because the world, the war, the Union Army, had taken everything from him: his mother, his sisters, his humanity. But Bill Anderson was not born a killer. That is the part of the story that most people forget. That is the part that does not fit the legend of the demon in human form who terrorized Missouri. Before the war, before the violence, before the 53 scalps that would eventually hang from his saddle like some macabre trophy collection, Bill Anderson was just a young man trying to survive in a world that was falling apart around him. He was born in 1840 in Hopkins County, Kentucky, the land of Daniel Boone, the frontier. His father, William Sr., was a farmer who worked the land with his own hands. His mother, Martha, was a gentlewoman who taught her children to read from the family Bible by candlelight. She believed in God. She believed in mercy. She believed that if you raised your children right, they would grow up to be good people. Bill had sisters, 3 of them, Mary, Martha, and the youngest, Josephine. He loved them the way older brothers love their younger sisters, with protection, with devotion, with a fierce determination that no harm would ever come to them. When Josephine was born, Bill was already 6 years old. He held her in his arms and made a promise, a silent promise that he would always keep her safe. He did not know then that it was a promise he would fail to keep. He did not know that her death would transform him into something his mother would not recognize, something that would make angels weep and demons applaud. But that comes later. The Anderson family moved west when Bill was a teenager. They were looking for opportunity, looking for land, looking for a fresh start in a territory that seemed to promise endless possibility. They settled in Kansas eventually, near Council Grove, trying to build a life on the frontier. It was hard work, honest work, the kind of work that built calluses on your hands and character in your soul. Bill learned to ride. He learned to shoot. He learned to track game through the tall prairie grass and to read the weather in the clouds and to survive in a land that did not forgive mistakes. He grew tall, strong, handsome by some accounts, the kind of young man that girls in town would notice and whisper about. He was quiet, mostly, kept to himself. But when he spoke, people listened. There was something in his eyes, even then, that commanded attention, a steadiness, a certainty. And then the war came. And with the war came choices, terrible choices. The kind of choices that no family should have to make. The kind of choices that divided fathers from sons, brothers from brothers, friends from friends. The Andersons were Confederate sympathizers, not because they owned slaves. They did not. They were too poor for that. But because they believed in states' rights. Because their neighbors were Confederate. Because the Union soldiers and Jayhawkers who rode through Kansas treated Southern sympathizers like criminals to be punished, not citizens to be protected. They burned farms. They stole livestock. They arrested men on suspicion of Confederate leanings and held them without trial. They made widows, they made orphans, and they did it all while waving the flag of freedom and union. Bill was around 20 years old when the trouble really started for his family. His father had some difficulties with the law. There are conflicting accounts about what exactly happened. Some say he was accused of horse theft. Others say it was related to bushwhacker activities. The details are murky, lost to history, and conflicting testimonies. What is clear is that in 1862, there was a confrontation. Some sources say Bill's father was killed by a Judge Baker over a land dispute or a legal matter gone wrong. Others say it was self-defense. Others say it was murder, plain and simple. The truth died with the men who were there. What survived was the consequence. Bill Anderson, orphaned of his father at 22 years old, began to ride with the bushwhackers. He had scores to settle. He had family to protect. He had rage building in his chest like a thunderstorm that would not break. He joined William Clark Quantrill's guerrilla band. Quantrill was already notorious by then. A Confederate irregular who operated outside the formal military chain of command. His men were not soldiers in any traditional sense. They were fighters, raiders. Some would say terrorists. They struck Union targets across Missouri and Kansas with impunity, then melted back into the civilian population. Bill learned fast. He was a natural. He could shoot from horseback with both hands. He could ride 60 miles in a day and fight at the end of it. He could look a man in the eyes and pull the trigger without flinching. But he was still, in those early days, something like human. He still laughed sometimes. He still showed mercy to prisoners who surrendered. He still believed that the war would end and he could go home and life would return to normal. He did not know that normal was already dead. He did not know that the worst, the absolute worst, was yet to come. Remember what I am about to tell you. Remember it, because it explains everything that follows. It explains the church. It explains the sheriff. It explains why a priest would keep silent for 4 decades about what he witnessed. It explains why Bill Anderson became the most feared guerrilla in American history. In the summer of 1863, Union authorities in Kansas City made a decision that would create a monster. They arrested the women. Not combatants, not spies, not enemy soldiers, women, sisters, mothers, daughters. The female relatives of known bushwhackers were rounded up across Missouri and brought to Kansas City. They were imprisoned in a makeshift jail, a 3-story brick building on Grand Avenue that had been hastily converted to hold these dangerous criminals. These women whose only crime was being related to men who fought against the Union. Among those arrested were members of Bill Anderson's family. His sisters, Mary and Josephine, were taken into custody. Josephine was 14 years old. 14, a child, a girl who had never fired a weapon in her life. A girl who should have been learning to sew and read and dream about boys and her future wedding, and all the things that 14-year-old girls dream about. Instead, she was thrown into a crowded building with dozens of other women, held as a hostage, a bargaining chip, a threat against her brother's good behavior. The conditions were deplorable. The building was overcrowded. The food was inadequate. The structure itself. The structure was unstable. The brick walls had cracks. The floors sagged. Union commanders knew this. Reports had been filed by their own engineers. Warnings had been given. Nothing was done. The women were Confederate sympathizers. The women were the enemy. The women could rot for all the Union command cared. And on August 13th, 1863, the building collapsed. Some say it was an accident, a tragic coincidence. The bricks simply gave way under the weight of too many prisoners. Others say Union soldiers had deliberately weakened the supports, that they had excavated the foundation in the days before, that they wanted the building to fall, that they wanted to send a message to the bushwhackers. Surrender, or we will kill your women. The truth is lost to history. The investigation that followed was a farce. No one was held accountable. No one was punished. What is not lost is the result. 5 women died in the collapse. Josephine Anderson was one of them. She was crushed under falling timber and brick and mortar. The weight of the second floor came down on top of her. Witnesses said she screamed for 6 minutes. 6 minutes. 360 seconds of agony, 360 seconds of terror, 360 seconds of a 14-year-old girl calling for help that would never come. Her legs were pinned, her chest was compressed, she could not breathe, she could not move, she could only scream and scream and scream until the weight finally silenced her. Mary Anderson, Bill's other sister who was also imprisoned, survived. But she was crippled for life. Her legs were crushed beneath the rubble. She would never walk properly again. Every step she took for the rest of her life would be a reminder of what the Union had done. When Bill Anderson received the news, when a rider found him in the Missouri brush and told him that his baby sister was dead, something inside him died too, and something else was born. They found him, they say, 3 days after the collapse. He had ridden his horse to exhaustion. He had not eaten. He had not slept. He had not spoken a word. He just rode north and south and east and west, looking for someone, anyone, to punish for what had happened. His men said his eyes had changed. The steadiness was still there, the certainty. But something was gone. Something human, something that had connected him to the rest of humanity. In its place was a void, a darkness, a cold, calculating rage that would never be satisfied. And in his saddlebag, folded carefully, stained with blood and dirt and the dust of a collapsed building, was Josephine's dress, the dress she had been wearing when she died. Bill Anderson had somehow obtained it, bribed a guard, stolen it from the morgue. The accounts vary, and he would carry it with him for the next 18 months, until the day he died. Every man he killed after that day, every Union soldier, every Jayhawker, every official who had sided with the men who killed his sister, Bill would show them that dress. How old was she? He would ask. And then he would pull the trigger. This is not the story of Josephine's death. You may have heard that story before. This is the story of what Bill Anderson did 18 months later. This is the story of a sheriff who thought a church would protect him from the vengeance of Bloody Bill. This is the story of a priest who witnessed judgment come to the house of God. Let us return to September 1864. Let us return to that small Missouri town. Let us return to the moment when Bill Anderson's boots first touched the worn wooden floor of St. Patrick's Catholic Church. The town was called Harrisburg. It sat on the edge of Boone County, Missouri, about 15 miles from the larger settlement of Columbia. It was the kind of town that the war should have passed by. Small, quiet, unremarkable. A general store that sold flour and coffee and ammunition, a blacksmith who shod horses and repaired wagon wheels, a church with a steeple that you could see from 2 miles away, a few dozen families trying to survive in a world that had gone mad. But no town in Missouri was too small for the war. No village was too remote. No community was too insignificant. The war found everyone. The war touched everything. The war left nothing untouched. The sheriff of Harrisburg was a man named Marcus Webb. He was not a native Missourian. He had come from Ohio at the start of the war, appointed by Union authorities to keep order in the county, to enforce the law, to suppress Confederate sympathizers. To keep order meant, in practice, to identify anyone who might oppose the Union, to arrest them, to fine them, to confiscate their property, to burn their farms if they refused to take the loyalty oath. Marcus Webb took to this work with enthusiasm. Too much enthusiasm, some said. Even other Union officials began to whisper that Sheriff Webb enjoyed his work a little too much, that he took liberties with his authority, that he was not just enforcing the law, he was profiting from it, that some of the property he confiscated, the horses, the cattle, the gold hidden in farmhouse cellars, it never made it to Union coffers. It ended up in Sheriff Webb's pocket instead. And there were other rumors, darker rumors. Rumors about what happened to some of the women he arrested, about what happened in the hours between arrest and release, about why some women came back from Sheriff Webb's custody with bruises that had not been there before, with eyes that would not meet anyone's gaze, with a silence that spoke louder than words. Nobody investigated these rumors. Nobody wanted to know. And then there was the Hollister family. Catherine Hollister was a widow. Her husband, Thomas, had ridden with the Confederate Army. He had died at the Battle of Shiloh in April 1862, cut down by Union artillery while charging a position that could not be taken. He was buried in a mass grave with hundreds of other Confederate dead. Catherine never saw his body. She never had a grave to visit. She only had a letter from his commanding officer saying that Thomas Hollister had died bravely. After Thomas died, Catherine was left alone on their small farm outside Harrisburg. She had a daughter named Sarah, who was 16 years old. Beautiful, innocent, the kind of girl who still believed that the world made sense, that good things happened to good people, that God protected the righteous. Sarah Hollister had hurt no one. She had aided no guerrillas. She had never even met a bushwhacker, as far as anyone knew. She simply tried to help her mother keep the farm running. She milked the cows. She fed the chickens. She tended the vegetable garden that kept them alive when there was no money for store-bought food, but Catherine Hollister refused to take the loyalty oath. When Sheriff Webb came to the farm with his papers and his badge and his demands, Catherine looked him in the eye and said no. She would not swear allegiance to the government that had killed her husband. She would not pretend to support the army that had left her a widow. She would not abandon the memory of Thomas Hollister for the sake of convenience. On principle, she said, on honor, on the memory of her dead husband. Sheriff Webb did not care about principle or honor or memory. He came to the Hollister farm on a hot July morning with 4 men, deputies, he called them. And though they wore no badges and their names appeared on no official roster, they were simply men who did what Sheriff Webb told them to do, men who asked no questions, men who looked the other way. They arrested Catherine and Sarah, they burned the farmhouse, they killed the livestock, shot the milk cow, slaughtered the chickens, ran off the pigs into the woods. And during the long march back to town, somewhere on that dusty road between the Hollister farm and the Harrisburg jail, something happened. Catherine Hollister would later describe it in a letter to relatives in Kentucky. She wrote the letter with a shaking hand. She crossed out words. She started over multiple times. Some passages were blotted with what might have been tears. She did not describe exactly what happened. She could not, but she made clear that it involved Sheriff Webb and her 16-year-old daughter and a barn just off the main road where the deputies stopped to rest their horses. Catherine was held outside that barn by 2 men. She could hear her daughter screaming inside. She could do nothing to help. The details were never made public. Catherine Hollister was too ashamed, too broken, too terrified of what Sheriff Webb might do if she spoke out. She and Sarah were released after 3 days with a warning. Keep quiet. Take the oath. Forget what happened. They took the oath. They kept quiet. But word spread anyway. In small towns, word always spreads. The deputies talked when they drank. Their wives heard things and whispered to other wives. Slowly, terribly, the truth seeped out like blood from a wound. And that truth eventually reached the ears of Bill Anderson. Not because anyone told him deliberately. The Hollisters had no connection to the guerrillas. They had never sought out Quantrill or Bill or any of the bushwhackers who haunted the Missouri brush. But Bill made it his business to know. He had spies in every town, men and women who passed him information about Union movements, about troop strengths, about supply lines, and about which Union officials had crossed certain lines, which sheriffs and commanders and soldiers had hurt women and children. Bill collected these names like other men collected debts, and he paid those debts, one by one, in blood, when Bill heard about Sheriff Webb. When he heard what had happened to Sarah Hollister, when he learned that a 16-year-old girl had been violated by a man who wore a badge and called it law enforcement. Something cold settled behind his eyes. He thought of Josephine. He thought of the dress in his saddlebag. He thought of the screaming that went on for 6 minutes in Kansas City, and he began to plan. It took 2 weeks to find Sheriff Webb. The man had grown cautious since the Hollister incident. He knew that his excesses had attracted attention. He knew that even some Union officials were uncomfortable with his methods. He knew that the bushwhackers might be hunting him. He moved from house to house, never sleeping in the same place twice. He surrounded himself with armed men. He avoided the main roads. He jumped at shadows. But Bill Anderson was patient. Bill Anderson was methodical. Bill Anderson had spies in every town in Boone County, and Bill Anderson had learned, during 18 months of guerrilla warfare, exactly how to find men who did not want to be found. On September 23, 1864, Bill received word that Sheriff Webb was in Harrisburg. The sheriff thought he was safe there. The town had a Union garrison nearby, only 5 miles away. There was a telegraph operator who could summon help if guerrillas were spotted. There were good citizens who would surely alert the authorities if they saw riders approaching. What Sheriff Webb did not know was that Bill Anderson had already paid a visit to the telegraph operator. The man was now tied up in his own cellar, his fingers broken, so he could not tap out a warning even if he somehow escaped his bonds. What Sheriff Webb did not know was that the Union garrison had been called away to chase a false report of guerrilla activity 20 miles to the north. A false report planted by Bill's own men. What Sheriff Webb did not know was that Bill Anderson and 30 of his best riders were already in the tree line outside of town, waiting for sunset, waiting for the moment when the light would be in the defenders' eyes, waiting for the moment when judgment would come to Harrisburg. The attack came at dusk. There was no warning, no demand for surrender, no negotiation. Just the thunder of horses and the crack of pistols and the screams of men who had thought themselves safe. Bill's guerrillas swept through the main street in less than 3 minutes. They shot the deputy who tried to raise his rifle. He went down with 2 bullets in his chest before his finger even found the trigger. They killed 2 militiamen who were sitting outside the general store, playing cards and complaining about the heat. The cards scattered in the dust, spotted with blood. They scattered the townspeople like leaves in a storm. Women grabbed their children and ran for cellars. Men dove behind water troughs and woodpiles. Dogs barked frantically. Horses reared and screamed. And then Bill Anderson stopped in front of the sheriff's office. It was empty. The door stood open. Papers were scattered on the floor. A half-eaten meal sat on the desk. Flies already buzzing around it. Sheriff Webb had fled in a hurry, leaving everything behind. Bill had expected this. Men like Sheriff Webb were cowards at heart, brave enough when they had a badge and a gun and a helpless woman in front of them. Brave enough when they outnumbered their victims 4 to 1, not so brave when death came calling on horseback. Bill turned to one of his men, a young guerrilla with cold blue eyes and a Colt Navy revolver that was almost too big for his hand. Jesse James was 17 years old, just 17. A boy, really, though he had stopped being a boy the day he joined the bushwhackers 6 months ago. He had already killed more men than most soldiers would kill in an entire war. "Find him," Bill said. His voice was quiet. It was always quiet. Bill Anderson never raised his voice, even in the heat of battle. He never needed to. When Bill spoke, people listened. Search every building, every cellar, every barn, every outhouse. He is here somewhere. He did not have time to get far. Jesse nodded and spurred his horse forward. The other guerrillas scattered through the town, kicking in doors, pulling aside curtains, searching every shadow. But it was not Jesse who found the sheriff. It was the priest. Father Patrick O'Brien had been in Missouri for 11 years. He had come from County Cork, Ireland, in 1853, fleeing the great famine that had devastated his homeland. He had watched his own mother die of starvation. He had buried 2 siblings in a mass grave. He had seen things that had destroyed his faith. And then, somehow, rebuilt it stronger than before. He had found his calling in America. He became a priest. He traveled west, ministering to the scattered Catholic communities on the frontier, Irish immigrants, German immigrants, anyone who needed the comfort of the church in a land that often seemed godless. His parish in Harrisburg was small, maybe 40 families. His church was modest, a wooden structure with a simple steeple built by the hands of his parishioners. But he served his people with dedication and love. He baptized their children. He married their young couples. He heard their confessions. He buried their dead. And he tried, as best he could, to stay out of the war. When the shooting started that September evening, Father O'Brien did what any good shepherd would do. He opened the doors of his church. He ran out into the street and began calling to the frightened townspeople. "Come inside," he shouted. His Irish accent was still thick after all these years in America. "Sanctuary, this is holy ground. Come inside." A few people came, women mostly, clutching their children to their chests. an old man who could not run fast enough to escape, a young mother with twins who were too young to understand why everyone was screaming, and at the last moment, just before Father O'Brien closed the heavy wooden doors, Sheriff Marcus Webb came stumbling up the church steps. The sheriff's face was pale. His hands were shaking. Sweat plastered his hair to his forehead. He had lost his hat somewhere. He had torn off his badge and thrown it in the dust, as if that would save him, as if Bill Anderson would not recognize the man he had been hunting for 2 weeks. "Father," he gasped. His voice was high and thin with terror. "You have to hide me. They will kill me. Anderson will kill me." The priest looked at the man who stood before him. He knew Sheriff Webb. Everyone in Harrisburg knew Sheriff Webb. He had seen the man strut through town, badge gleaming, making sure everyone knew who held the power. He had heard the rumors, the whispers that even the women in confession were afraid to speak aloud. He knew what this man was. And yet, he was a priest. This was a church. And in the eyes of God, even the most wretched sinner deserved a chance at redemption. Even a man who had done terrible things. Even a man whose hands were stained with sins too dark to name. That was the whole point of the church. That was the whole point of confession. That no one was beyond salvation. That everyone could be forgiven. That the door to mercy was never fully closed. "Come," Father O'Brien said, "quickly." He led the sheriff through the church, past the huddled townspeople who looked up with frightened eyes, past the simple wooden pews, past the altar with its modest crucifix, to the confessional. It was a simple wooden booth built by a carpenter in the parish 10 years ago. 2 compartments separated by a wooden screen, one side for the priest, one side for the penitent. A place where secrets were shared and burdens were lifted and forgiveness was sought. "Get inside," the priest said. He opened the door to the penitent's side. "Stay silent, no matter what happens. Stay silent. God will protect you." Sheriff Webb crawled into the confessional and pulled the door shut behind him. He pressed himself into the corner, trying to make himself as small as possible. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. He clasped his hands together, though whether in prayer or simple terror, only God could say. Father O'Brien closed the door firmly. He straightened his cassock. He clasped his hands in front of him. And he waited. 3 minutes later, the church doors opened again, but this time there was no explosion, no crash, no violence, just a quiet creak of hinges. And then footsteps, slow, deliberate, measured. The sound of spurs clinking against the stone floor of the sanctuary. Bill Anderson walked into St. Patrick's Church like a man who had every right to be there. He was not what Father O'Brien had expected. The priest had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had heard the stories. Bloody Bill, the demon of Missouri, the man who scalped his enemies and braided their hair into his horse's reins, the monster who had killed more men than most people could count. He had expected something larger, more obviously terrible. Horns and a tail, perhaps. Fire in his eyes. Blood dripping from his hands. Instead, he saw a young man, 24 years old, though he looked older, weathered by wind and sun and sleepless nights, lean and hard with not an ounce of fat on his frame. His clothes were dusty from hard riding. His hat was pulled low over his eyes. At his hips hung 2 Colt Navy revolvers, well worn and obviously well used. And those eyes, Father O'Brien would remember those eyes for the rest of his life. He would see them in dreams, in nightmares, in quiet moments of prayer when he tried to understand what he had witnessed. They were not the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, suffered too much. There was no madness there. No bloodlust, no demonic fire, just emptiness, a void where something human used to be, a hollow where hope had once lived and died. Bill stopped in the center aisle of the church. He looked around slowly, taking everything in, the wooden pews with their worn cushions, the simple altar with its white cloth, the crucifix on the wall, Christ looking down with eternal sorrow, the candles flickering in their holders, casting dancing shadows on the walls, the frightened women clutching their children, the old man with his rosary beads, and then his gaze settled on the priest. "Father," Bill said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, respectful even. "I am looking for a man." Father O'Brien swallowed hard. His mouth was dry, his heart was pounding, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "There is no one here but women and children, and myself. This is a house of God, sir. There is no violence here." Bill nodded slowly. He understood the priest's position. He even respected it in his own way. "I respect the house of God, Father." He reached up and removed his hat, holding it against his chest. It was a surprisingly courteous gesture. The gesture of a man who had been raised right, before the world had twisted him into something else. "My mother taught me to remove my hat in church. She was a godly woman. She believed in mercy and forgiveness and all the things that the church teaches. Please," the priest said, "whatever your quarrel is with any man here, I beg you to take it elsewhere. This is sanctuary, holy ground. Even kings in ancient times respected the sanctuary of the church." Bill was silent for a long moment. His eyes moved past the priest. They traveled slowly along the walls, the windows, the corners, the shadows, and finally, they came to rest on the confessional. "Sanctuary," Bill repeated. "That is an interesting word, Father." He took a step forward, then another. He was close enough now that Father O'Brien could smell him, gunpowder and leather and sweat, and something else. Something metallic, something that smelled like copper. The priest realized with a chill that ran down his spine that he was smelling dried blood. Bill Anderson was covered in it. It was in his clothes, under his fingernails, probably in his hair. The blood of men he had killed that day, that week, that month. "Tell me something, Father." Bill's voice was still soft, but there was something underneath it now, something cold, something that made the priest's knees want to buckle when they brought those women to Kansas City, my mother's friends, my sister's friends, and locked them in that building that they knew was unstable. Did those women have sanctuary? The priest opened his mouth to respond. No words came out. When the building collapsed on them, Bill continued. His voice did not change. It remained soft, gentle, almost meditative. "When my sister Josephine, 14 years old, Father, when she screamed for 6 minutes while the timbers crushed her, while the brick pressed down on her chest and squeezed the life out of her one breath at a time. Did she have sanctuary?" Father O'Brien felt tears forming in his eyes. "I heard about that tragedy. I'm sorry for your loss, truly. God knows I'm sorry, but that does not give you the right to..." Bill held up a hand. The priest fell silent. "I am not here for vengeance, Father." Bill's voice was almost kind, almost understanding. "I know what vengeance is. It is blind, it strikes without care, without thought, without discrimination. It kills the innocent alongside the guilty." He paused. "That is not what I do. I only kill the guilty. I only punish those who have earned punishment. There is a difference between vengeance and justice, Father. Do you know what that difference is?" The priest shook his head mutely. "Vengeance is personal," Bill said. "Justice is righteous. Vengeance serves the self. Justice serves the truth. Vengeance creates more suffering. Justice ends it." He paused again. "Or so I tell myself. In the dark hours of the night, when I cannot sleep, I tell myself that what I do is justice, that I am not a monster, that I am a man who has been given a terrible task and carries it out as best he can." He took another step forward. The priest took an involuntary step backward. His back pressed against the wooden door of the confessional. "There is a man in this town," Bill continued, "a sheriff, a man who wears a badge and calls himself the law. But he is not the law, Father. He is a criminal, a rapist, a thief. He hurt a woman, a widow. And he hurt that woman's daughter, a girl named Sarah Hollister. She was 16 years old." Bill's voice hardened slightly. The same age my sister was when they first arrested her. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. That man is guilty, Bill said. He has committed crimes that would make the devil himself blush, and I will find him. Here, in this church, or anywhere else he might hide. I will find him, please, Father O'Brien whispered. His voice was barely audible. I am bound by my oath. I cannot. Bill reached out and gently, almost tenderly, moved the priest aside. His hand was surprisingly warm. There was no violence in the touch, just certainty, just the absolute conviction of a man who knew what he had to do and would not be stopped. I am not asking you to break any oath, Father. Bill stepped past the priest and stood in front of the confessional. He stared at the wooden door for a long moment. His hand rested on the handle. I'm just going to make a confession of my own. He opened the door to the priest's side of the confessional and stepped inside. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the church. The candles flickered, the shadows danced, the women huddled in the pews held their breath. The old man stopped his prayers mid-word. Father O'Brien stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but watch. And then Bill Anderson's voice drifted out from behind the screen, soft, almost gentle, with a terrible intimacy that made the priest's blood run cold. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. On the other side of the screen, Sheriff Marcus Webb made a sound. It was barely human, something between a whimper and a moan. The sound of a man who has just realized that there is no escape, that judgment has found him at last. It has been. Oh, I cannot remember how long since my last confession. Bill's voice was calm, conversational, as if he were discussing the weather or the price of horses. My mother used to make us go every Sunday. She believed in the power of confession, the cleansing of the soul. But after she died, after everything that happened, I stopped believing, or maybe I just stopped caring. Silence from the other side of the screen. Sheriff Webb was trying not to breathe, trying not to exist, praying that somehow, impossibly, Bill did not know he was there. I have killed men, Bill continued. Many men, more than I can count. Is that a sin, Father? When those men have killed innocents themselves, when they have burned farms and arrested women and done other things, to girls who were too young to defend themselves, is killing them a sin, or is it justice? I truly do not know anymore. A long pause. I have done terrible things, Bill said. His voice was softer now, almost sad. Things that would make you weep if I described them. Things that I cannot undo, cannot take back, cannot apologize for. I have scalped men, I have mutilated bodies, I have left widows and orphans in my wake. Another pause. But so have they. The men I kill. They have done the same things to us. Worse things, maybe. They started this war, they invaded our homes, they burned our farms, they arrested our women, they killed my sister. Bill's voice hardened again. So tell me, Father, tell me, Sheriff, who is the greater sinner here? The man who kills in vengeance, or the man who kills for what? For power? For pleasure? For the simple joy of hurting those who cannot fight back? A strangled sob from behind the screen. Sheriff Webb could no longer maintain his silence. I am not who you think I am. Bill did not respond. I'm just a man, the sheriff continued. His words tumbled over each other, frantic and desperate. I was just following orders. I did not want to. I mean, I had no choice. They made me do it. The union made me. I was just doing my duty. I was just... Bill's voice cut through the babbling like a blade. Tell me about Catherine Hollister. Silence. Tell me about her daughter Sarah. The sheriff made a choking sound, like something was caught in his throat, like he was drowning on dry land. I know what you did, Bill said. His voice was still calm, still quiet, but there was something in it now that made the priest's blood freeze in his veins, something cold, something ancient. something that had nothing to do with humanity. I know what you did to that girl. I know what you did while her mother listened from outside that barn. So do not lie to me. Not here, not in the house of God, not in the confessional where your soul is supposed to be laid bare before the Almighty. A sob from behind the screen. I did not. I mean, she was just... Bill waited. And then Sheriff Marcus Webb did something that would haunt Father O'Brien for the rest of his life. He confessed. Not to Bill, not really, but to God, to the universe, to whatever power might be listening and judging. The words poured out of him like blood from an arterial wound. Everything he had done, every crime, every cruelty, every moment when he had abused his power and hurt those who could not fight back. He confessed to stealing from the farms he was supposed to protect. He confessed to taking bribes. He confessed to false arrests and fabricated charges. He confessed to beatings that left men crippled. He confessed to burnings that left families homeless. And he confessed to Sarah Hollister. He confessed in detail. Horrible detail. Detail that made Father O'Brien want to cover his ears and run from the church and never come back. Detail that explained exactly what had happened in that barn on that hot July afternoon. It took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of horror poured into the sacred space of the confessional. When it was over, the church was silent. The candles had burned lower. The light from the windows was fading, and Bill Anderson sat in the confessional, hidden from view, absorbing every word. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you for your confession, Sheriff." His voice was different now, harder, colder. The pretense of gentleness was gone. You asked if you could be forgiven. You asked if God would have mercy on your wretched soul. A whimper from behind the screen. "I cannot speak for God," Bill said. "I do not know his mind. I'm not a priest or a prophet. I'm just a man, a broken man. But I can tell you what I know." He paused. "I know that there was a 14-year-old girl named Josephine Anderson who never hurt anyone in her life, who never raised her hand against another human being, who only wanted to grow up and get married and have children and live a normal life. She died screaming in a collapsed building while Union soldiers watched and did nothing. Nothing." Another pause. "And I know that there was a 16-year-old girl named Sarah Hollister who was violated by a man who was supposed to protect her, a man who hid behind a badge and called it justice, a man who made her mother listen while he destroyed her daughter's innocence." The screen between them creaked as Bill leaned closer. "And I know this, Sheriff. I know that there is no confession long enough, no prayer sincere enough, no act of penance profound enough, no pilgrimage far enough, nothing you can do or say or think that will wash the blood off your hands. You are not here to be forgiven, Sheriff. You are not here to find mercy. You are here to be judged." Bill stood up. The confessional door opened with a creak that echoed through the silent church, and Sheriff Marcus Webb made a sound that Father O'Brien would hear in his nightmares for the next 40 years. It was the sound of a man who knew he was about to die. What happened next took less than 30 seconds. Bill Anderson walked around to the other side of the confessional. He pulled open the door. Sheriff Webb tried to bolt, but there was nowhere to go. The booth was too small. Bill's hand shot out and grabbed him by the collar. He dragged the sheriff out into the aisle of the church like a man dragging a sack of grain. The women screamed. The children wailed. The old man began praying louder than ever. Father O'Brien shouted something. He would never remember exactly what words came out of his mouth. Some plea for mercy, some prayer for divine intervention. Bill ignored them all. He dragged the sheriff to the center of the church, right in front of the altar. He threw him down on the cold stone floor. The sheriff lay there, sobbing, curled into a ball, and then Bill reached into his saddlebag, the saddlebag that the priest had noticed when Bill first entered, the saddlebag that seemed heavier than it should be, the saddlebag that smelled faintly of something old and terrible. He pulled out a dress. It was small, A child's dress. It had been white once perhaps, or pale blue. Some innocent color that a mother would choose for her daughter. Now it was stained brown. The color of old dried blood. The color of a wound that would never heal. It was wrinkled and worn, handled too many times by hands that could not let go. 18 months of handling, 18 months of grief made tangible. Bill held the dress in front of the sheriff's face. "How old was she?" Bill asked. His voice was quiet, almost gentle again, as if he were asking about the weather. The sheriff sobbed, "I do not know. I do not understand. How old was she?" Bill did not shout. He never shouted. But the words filled the church like thunder, like the voice of God himself passing judgment on a wretched sinner. 14. The sheriff gasped. Josephine. She was 14. Bill nodded slowly. "And Sarah Hollister," he said. "How old was she?" The sheriff could not speak. He just shook his head, tears and snot streaming down his face. 16, Bill said. She was 16, old enough to remember every moment, old enough to be destroyed by what you did to her, old enough to know exactly what you stole from her. He folded the dress carefully, almost reverently, and placed it back in his saddlebag. Then he drew his pistol. Father O'Brien rushed forward. He did not know what he intended to do. Stop Bill somehow. Shield the sheriff with his own body. Offer himself in the man's place. Invoke some ancient rite of sanctuary that would make the guerrilla pause. He never got there. Bill's free hand came up and caught the priest gently by the shoulder. It was not a violent gesture. It was almost protective, almost kind. "Do not," Bill said quietly. "This is not your sin to carry." Father O'Brien looked into those empty eyes, and he saw something there that he had not expected. He saw sorrow, deep, abiding, inconsolable sorrow. "I know what he did," Bill said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "And I know what I'm about to do. You do not have to watch, Father. Turn away. Pray for his soul if you wish. Pray for mine too, but do not interfere. Justice will be done." "It is not justice," the priest whispered back. "It is murder." Bill was silent for a moment. "Perhaps," he said finally. "Perhaps it is, but tell me, Father, what is the difference between murder and justice when the law itself is corrupt? When the men who wear badges are the ones committing crimes? When they can hurt women and children and face no consequences? When they can destroy innocence and walk away free?" He gestured toward the sheriff, who lay sobbing on the floor. "This man," Bill continued, "this man arrested innocent women. This man burned farms. This man stole from those he was supposed to protect. This man violated a 16-year-old girl while her mother listened and wept, and the union, the law, would have done nothing. He would have kept his badge, kept his power, kept hurting people, forever, until someone stopped him." Bill's voice hardened. "I am not a good man, Father. I know that. God knows I know that. I will answer for my sins when my time comes. I expect no mercy. I deserve none. But today this man answers for his sins." He turned back to the sheriff, and he offered him a choice. "You can run," Bill said. The sheriff looked up through tear-blurred eyes, confusion breaking through his terror. "I am giving you the same chance you gave those women you arrested," Bill continued. "The same chance you gave Catherine Hollister when you burned her farm. The same chance you gave Sarah when you dragged her into that barn. Run! The door is right there. If you make it through before I count to 10, you live. If you do not..." He did not need to finish the sentence. Sheriff Webb scrambled to his feet. His legs were shaking so badly that he almost fell. He looked at the church door. It was 30 feet away, maybe 40, an impossible distance. An eternity of stone floor and scattered pews. But it was a chance. The only chance he would ever have. "1," Bill said. The sheriff ran. 2. He knocked over a pew in his panic. It crashed to the floor with a sound like thunder. 3. He was halfway there. His boots slipped on the smooth stone. 4, 20 feet to go. 5. He was gasping for breath. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might explode. 6, 15 feet. 7, 10 feet. So close, so impossibly close. 8, 5 feet. 9. His hand touched the door handle, cold iron beneath his sweating palm. 10. He pulled the door open. Sunlight streamed in, blinding after the darkness of the church. The shot echoed through the sanctuary like the voice of God. Sheriff Marcus Webb fell forward through the doorway. He landed face down in the dust of the street outside. His fingers twitched once, twice. Then they were still. He did not move again. Bill Anderson holstered his pistol. He walked slowly toward the door. His boots echoed on the stone floor. He stepped over the sheriff's body without looking down. The dust was already settling on the corpse, covering it in a thin brown shroud, and then Bill paused. He turned back to Father O'Brien. "I am sorry," Bill said. His voice was quiet again, almost gentle again. The mask of the killer had slipped, just for a moment, revealing something underneath, something human, something in pain. "I am sorry you had to see that. I know this is your church, your sanctuary. I have violated it, and for that I am truly sorry." The priest could not speak. He just stared. "But I want you to remember something, Father." Bill's voice was steady, measured, the words of a man who had rehearsed this speech in his mind 1,000 times. "There were 53 scalps on my saddle when the Union finally caught up with me. 53 men who I judged guilty. 53 lives I ended, but there were thousands that I let live. Men who begged for mercy and received it. Men who had done nothing wrong except wear the wrong uniform. Men who surrendered and were allowed to walk away." He paused. "I am not a monster, Father. I am a man, a broken man, a destroyed man, but a man nonetheless. I feel pain. I feel sorrow. I feel regret. Every night, when I close my eyes, I see their faces. Every man I ever killed, every scream I ever heard, it haunts me. It will haunt me forever." He put his hat back on. "Pray for me, Father, if you can. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But perhaps God will understand. Perhaps he knows what it is like to lose someone you love, to watch innocents suffer while the powerful do nothing. Perhaps he knows what it is like to become something you never wanted to be, because the world left you no other choice." Bill Anderson walked out of the church and into the fading Missouri light. Father O'Brien stood alone in the silence. Outside, he could hear horses, shouts. The guerrillas were leaving. Their work here was done. The town would survive, this time. But the priest would never be the same. What happened after that day in Harrisburg has been debated by historians for over a century and a half. Father Patrick O'Brien never spoke publicly about what he witnessed in St. Patrick's Church, not to his bishop, not to the authorities, not to the journalists who came through Missouri after the war, collecting stories about Bloody Bill and his reign of terror. Not to anyone. He continued his ministry for another 43 years. He baptized children. He married couples. He heard confessions in that same wooden booth where Sheriff Webb had hidden and been found. He buried the dead of Harrisburg, including some who had died at the hands of bushwhackers. But he never forgot. On his deathbed in 1907, surrounded by members of his parish and a young priest named Father Thomas Murphy, who had been sent to record his final words, Father O'Brien finally broke his silence. He told the story of that September day. He described Bill Anderson's eyes, those empty, sorrowful, haunted eyes. He repeated the words that the guerrilla had spoken about justice and murder and the corrupted law. And he said something else. Something that changed how people understood Bloody Bill Anderson. "He was not evil," Father O'Brien whispered. His voice was barely audible. The old priest was 91 years old, and his lungs were failing him. Father Murphy had to lean close to hear, his ear nearly touching the dying man's lips. He was broken, destroyed by what they did to his sister, everything he did after that day, every terrible thing, every scalp, every killing, every nightmare act of violence. It was the howl of a wounded animal, not malice, agony, pure, distilled, unending agony. The old priest paused, gathering his remaining strength. "I have heard 10,000 confessions in my life," he continued. "I have heard murderers, thieves, adulterers, men and women who committed every sin imaginable. I have heard things that would make a normal person weep. And I tell you this on my deathbed with God as my witness." Bill Anderson's confession that day in the church. Those words he spoke to the sheriff through the screen. That was the most honest confession I ever heard. The most raw, the most true. He knew what he was. He knew what he had become. And he mourned it. He mourned himself. He mourned the boy he used to be before the war took everything from him. Father O'Brien died 3 days later. His words were carefully recorded by Father Thomas Murphy, who would later write a short account of the incident for the Missouri Historical Society. That account was largely ignored for decades. It did not fit the narrative. Bloody Bill was supposed to be a monster, a demon in human form, a cautionary tale about the evils of the Confederacy, not a broken young man carrying his dead sister's dress in his saddlebag, weeping for what he had lost and what he had become. But the truth is always more complicated than the legends. Bill Anderson was killed 5 weeks after the incident in Harrisburg. On October 26, 1864, he rode into an ambush near Albany, Missouri. A Union force under Colonel Samuel P. Cox had been tracking him for days. They knew his habits. They knew his routes. They knew that he always rode at the front of his men, leading from the front like a true guerrilla commander. They set up their position on a ridge overlooking the road. They waited, and when Bill came riding through, his long hair flowing behind him, his pistols at his sides, they opened fire. It was over in seconds. Bill was shot twice in the head and twice in the chest. He was dead before he hit the ground. He was 24 years old, the same age as Alexander the Great when he conquered his first major enemy, the same age as John Keats when he wrote some of his greatest poetry. A young man, really. A boy who had been forced to become something monstrous by a monstrous world. They found Josephine's dress in his saddlebag. It was still stained with blood. The Union soldiers displayed Bill's body for 3 days. They propped him up in a chair outside the courthouse in Richmond, Missouri. They put a sign around his neck that read, "Bloody Bill Anderson, killed by Cox." People came from miles around to see the famous guerrilla, the terror of Missouri, the demon who had haunted their nightmares. Some came to celebrate. They spat on him. They cursed his name. They threw rocks at his corpse. Women who had lost husbands and sons to his raids came with knives and scissors. They stabbed his body. They cut pieces from his clothing. They took souvenirs of their hatred. But others came to mourn. Confederate sympathizers, families who had been protected by Bill's guerrillas. Men and women who remembered that before he was Bloody Bill, before the scalps and the raids and the massacres, he was just a young man who loved his sisters and wanted to protect them. They cut off his trigger finger and sent it to his surviving sister, Mary, the crippled one, the one who had survived the building collapse but would never walk properly again. They buried what was left of him in an unmarked grave, and Missouri tried to forget, but history does not forget. Not really. And as the years passed, as the Civil War faded into memory, as the old grudges died with the old men who held them, a different picture of Bill Anderson began to emerge. Not a monster, not a hero, just a man. A man who was destroyed by the same war that destroyed so many others. A man who became something terrible in response to something terrible that was done to him. A man who carried his dead sister's blood-stained dress until the day he died because he could not let go of what he had lost. The priest understood this. Father O'Brien, in his 43 years of silence, had come to understand something about human nature that most people never grasp, something that the simplistic narratives of good and evil, north and south, blue and grey, completely miss. He understood that people are not born evil. They are made evil, shaped by circumstances beyond their control, broken by traumas they did not deserve, twisted by grief that has no outlet except violence. Bill Anderson was not born a killer. He was made into one. By a war that showed no mercy, by men who hurt innocent women, by a government that locked a 14-year-old girl in a collapsing building and watched her die, and in the end, in the absolute end, he was just a 24-year-old farmer's son who wanted to protect his sisters and could not. That is the tragedy. That is the truth. And that is why Father O'Brien prayed for Bill Anderson's soul every single night for 43 years, not because he thought Bill deserved forgiveness, but because he understood that some wounds never heal, that some losses can never be recovered from, that some men are destroyed so completely by what happens to them that there is nothing left of who they used to be. Only the ghost remains. Only the memory, only the blood-stained dress in the saddlebag. If you have stayed with this story until now, if you have listened to the tale of Bill Anderson and the sheriff and the priest, then you understand something that most people never will. You understand that history is not simple, that heroes and villains are often the same people, viewed from different angles, that the line between good and evil runs not between armies or nations, but through every human heart. You understand that the American Civil War was not just a conflict between armies. It was a catastrophe that destroyed families, that broke men, that turned neighbor against neighbor and brother against brother, that created monsters out of ordinary people who might otherwise have lived and died in peace. And you understand that the echoes of that war, the trauma, the grief, the rage, continue to resonate through the generations, through us, through our children, through the unhealed wounds that still fester in the American soul. Stories like this, the ones they do not teach in school, the ones that force us to confront the uncomfortable truths of our history. These stories matter. They remind us that human beings are complicated, that circumstances shape character, that anyone can become something terrible if pushed far enough. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, if you want to help uncover more forgotten chapters of American history, the ones that reveal who we really are and how we got here, you can click the Super Thanks button below. Every contribution helps us continue this work, continue telling the stories that need to be told, continue giving voice to the dead who can no longer speak for themselves. Thank you for listening. Now, before I go, I want to leave you with a question. Think about Sheriff Marcus Webb. Think about what he did. Think about the 16-year-old girl he violated. Think about the families he destroyed. Think about the badge he wore while doing it. And think about the fact that if Bill Anderson had not found him that day in the church, he would have faced no consequences. He would have kept his badge, kept his power, kept hurting people, until he died of old age, surrounded by grandchildren who never knew what their grandfather really was. Was what Bill Anderson did murder? Or was it justice? I do not have an answer. Neither did Father O'Brien. Neither, I suspect, did Bill himself. But it is a question worth asking. It is a question that still matters, because the struggle between law and justice, between authority and accountability, between power and the abuse of power, that struggle did not end in 1864. It continues today. It continues wherever men with badges abuse their power, wherever the weak are victimized by the strong, wherever the law protects the guilty and punishes the innocent. Comment below with your thoughts. Was Bill Anderson a monster? A victim? Both? Neither. Is there a point where vengeance becomes justice? Is there a point where justice becomes vengeance? I want to hear what you think, because stories like this, they do not belong to the past. They belong to all of us, and how we understand them, how we learn from them. That determines what kind of future we build. Until next time, this is Civil War Outlaws and the truth. The truth is never black and white.